Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name's Richard Catling. I'm a partner at Al Tamimi, and I'm joined today by Nawal Abdelhadi, Senior Counsel. Both of us work very closely together in all aspects of family business advisory, and in that context we've recently issued a white paper that deals with all aspects of succession and how really important that is for families to think about how to properly manage and provide for a smooth and efficient succession of ownership for family businesses. And so this is a series of podcasts, video podcasts, in which we're going to touch upon a number of different aspects of advice. As I said, our family business practice is an area of practice that we've been working very closely together in for over a decade now in the region, advising some of the leading and largest family businesses in a regional sense. And we are often talking to them about many different aspects of their ownership, their succession planning, and governance, and lots of issues that arise from just how important family businesses are in the region and how important it is to ensure that their ongoing success is maintained, and mitigating possible issues that can arise in the life and of your average, not that there is of course an average family business. With that in mind, the first episode in the series today is going to be touching upon the UAE legal framework and how that provides for structuring models for family businesses in the region, and specifically here in the UAE, Nawal. Ultimately, obviously, these family businesses have got a long track record, have been here and with us for many decades, and so have grown up with the UAE legal environment, and as a result, in nearly all cases, are structured in the forms of companies. So obviously, they're all quite often aspects of sole establishments we can talk about in a little bit as well. But predominantly, you would normally expect, wouldn't you, a family business to have a number of family shareholders sitting in ultimately one or maybe more commercial companies structured under the CCL. And that's really been what we would have expected to have been there for many decades, predominantly because that was really the only option available.
Yes, absolutely, Richard. I mean, the UAE has been taking a very proactive approach in providing family businesses with different options and a legal framework and infrastructure to provide them with the tools necessary for their succession planning, structuring, putting in place legally binding arrangements, starting with the establishments of the financial free zones, which provided for options based on the common law system. Obviously, as you've said, most structures we see are based on limited liability companies, subject and governed by the Commercial Companies Law. Now, the Commercial Companies Law has certain restrictions that might not necessarily assist family businesses in achieving the objectives they want. However, now with the federal law on family businesses, there's another option that can assist families in putting in place the proper legal structure and putting in place the desired legal arrangements to provide for their succession planning.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of key additions that law's introduced, hasn't it, that really helps in that regard. So let's take one, for example, the ability to have a binding family arrangement in the form of a constitution or other shareholder agreement. That's a really useful development.
Absolutely. It allows also for classes of shares. So families can now separate ownership from management. It also provides and facilitates the share buybacks, which was previously restricted to joint stock companies. So it facilitates the exit of a family member who does not wish to continue in the family business without compromising on the ownership of the family.
And in addition, there's also a new committee that would be, or is to be constituted, that's going to be there to help resolve family disputes as well. But actually, just touching upon the share buyback, I mean, it seems like just a pretty simple concept, but it's actually really useful, isn't it? Because in our experience, what we often see is that family members at times can fall out of alignment. And in the past, what that would mean is that ultimately the courts would have to get involved. But if there is an ability to embed in the shareholder agreement and the constitutional documents an exit route where a family member or a branch of a family can say, okay, thank you very much, but we'd now like to separate. That buyback now gives an additional means to the business to sort of survive that exit, and for the remaining family members to continue as one cohesive group.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, now, other than the preemption right for other family members, the company now can buy back up to 30% of its shares under this new law, where a family member who does not wish to continue in the family business can exit without jeopardizing the family business or other family members.
And again, the family shareholder arrangements and agreement, I mean, that, again, simple, but so many things you can do with that, a really useful tool for families, because the problem in the past, as I understand, is that, the notary public's attitude to making significant changes to your standard MOA of a company incorporated under the CCL. That's problematic, isn't it? They wouldn't have normally allowed you to.
Yes, usually there's a specific template for MOAs that should comply with the provisions of the Commercial Companies Law. So, for example, having classes of shares in a limited liability company governed by the Commercial Companies Law under the MOA was not possible, because the law does not provide for this concept to start with. Whereas under the new federal law, on family businesses, you can provide in your MOA for classes of shares, for share buybacks, even for other arrangements that the family want to embed in the MOA and in the charter.
Absolutely. And so the shareholder agreement now allows you to do a lot more things that you couldn't otherwise do, which gives the family the opportunity to think about governance, for example, in a lot more detail, doesn't it? So, I mean, the idea the ability to set up specific boards with specific powers, specific authorities, invested in committees, the ability to involve and engage a wider group of family members in the ownership and governance of the business, the ability to be more transparent insofar as there's a transmission of data and information to the shareholders. Basically, what in effect I think we're saying is that the law has now allowed families to move out of the quite rigid restrictions of the Commercial Companies Law and think maybe more holistically about the business as a whole, which is really important because, the inflection point that we often see is the succession from the first generation of ownership to the second, third generations. And that's obviously something that's happening a lot at the moment. It's really informing families' thoughts. And so to have this new law that the government's issued with all of these different characteristics is ultimately really, really helpful. The ability for those laws, so I think what we're saying is that if there is any dispute that would originate out of an inheritance provision under the personal status law, correct me if I'm wrong, that the new law provides that as long as the company set up under the umbrella, if you like, of the family companies law, that it's not recognized. So
basically, the law provides in this unique provision that any disposition made by a shareholder under this law is not considered a circumvention of the person status law. It's actually compliant with the person status law as long as this disposition has been made during the lifetime of the disposing shareholder.
Absolutely. And thinking about Sharia inheritance laws and the issues that can surround disgruntled heirs, having something very clearly in the law now to provide for an arrangement that family members can make in their lifetime and know that it will be respected is really.
Absolutely. This is a key element in any family business that wish to restructure and put arrangements or legally binding arrangements in place. The most important thing is not to put a structure, is to ensure that this structure will survive any potential challenges in the future. And Sharia is a key aspect when considering the succession planning of family businesses.
Absolutely. But of course, this session today is here to talk about other options as well, to give a more broader view of the legal framework, as I said. So we often find quite a lot of families that are opting into the local common law jurisdictions that we have here in the UAE, most notably the DIFC and ADGM, so Dubai International Financial Centre, Abu Dhabi Global Market. So, I mean, what are the sort of options that those common law arrangements provide that are unique to families, and how can families leverage those as opposed to simply the Commercial Companies Law and the new Family Companies Law? These other areas, these other jurisdictions have quite different laws, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the financial free zones provide for more flexible arrangements for family businesses. There's no right or wrong. Each family must consider its own circumstances, the family dynamics, the class of assets, what they're trying to achieve. Every structure has its advantages and its disadvantages. However, generally speaking, trusts and foundations, such as those available in the financial free zones, do provide ultimate flexibility in designing family arrangements.
I mean, these are real classic models that, in the Western world have been used for many, many decades to structure family businesses. And, uniquely in this part of the world, we have two financial centers that have now a reasonable track record themselves of providing for these structures for families. And we've seen many families opt into the DIFC and ADGM to take advantage of trusts and foundations. So private trust companies can allow a separation of legal and beneficial ownership to allow a larger group of family members to own, have an interest, an economic interest in the business, while separating out the legal ownership in the hands of, a properly structured PTC or private trust company, which allows for the family members to come and go, but ultimately for that structure to stay in place with a perpetual succession. And then similarly, you mentioned the foundations as well, which are, they're not unique to this part of the world, but I think they're being uniquely utilized now to really hold and own civil law. The business is established in the civil law environment. And the foundation's unique for a number of particular characteristics, not least that it has no shareholders, right?
No shareholders, no members. And maybe it's worth also noting that authorities and regulators, not only in the UAE, but throughout the region, are now more comfortable and more familiar with these structures in accepting ownership of assets through these structures. So this is another advantage that families can also utilize in this part of the world.
Absolutely. Thinking about those laws, they've been in place now for going on for over 10 years at least in the case of the DIFC. And I think, as with anything, you have some outliers who are prepared to move into that legal environment initially, but I think generally, as I understand it, the market and family businesses are more willing to move in to the DIFC and ADGM now, because I think they've seen that it has a good track record. It's a very popular, very successful financial centers, both of them. And these options, and especially for family businesses, are really powerful because, as you say, the inherent flexibility means that, a large family with many issues, all of those issues are going to be able to be accommodated for, considered carefully, and provided for in binding documentation, whether that's in a trust or a foundation. And also, though, because they're part of the UAE environment, the DIFC court is part of the UAE court system. DIFC companies are not considered to be foreign companies for regulators, at least in Dubai. They do sit neatly in the existing business environment. And so a holding company in the DIFC or a foundation is at least nowadays, we're seeing being readily understood and appreciated by regulators, as you mentioned. And for families with lots of different types of assets, operating businesses, private wealth, real estate, for example, we're now seeing that these the structures are being very well understood and widely adopted as a result.
Yes, specifically with regards to real estate, we can see now that foundations are acceptable vehicles to own real estate directly in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi, subject to complying with any local ownership restrictions, obviously. However, this is a very positive step in assisting families with a big real estate portfolio in putting in place the proper legal structure and succession planning arrangements.
So just to finish, maybe if you were a family and you were looking at all of these options and considering what to do next, what would your immediate plan of action be? What should a family think about? And ultimately, obviously, what's that process that they would go through to sort of get to the point where they feel that, yes, actually a restructuring is probably right for us at this time?
It's necessary for any family to approach this from a holistic point of view. So they need to consider what's their vision, what are they trying to achieve, what are the asset class, the size of the family, what arrangements that they wish to implement, and whether such arrangements will continue for the future or will be limited to a certain timeline. This is a big exercise. It's a long-term exercise. It's a process as opposed to just one step. However, it pays off very well, specifically with big families with diversified assets over the region.
Absolutely. So an internal conversation with all of the stakeholders, ultimately is probably the first
step.
First
The
step.
first step, absolutely.
Okay. Well, as I said, there'll be a succession of podcasts and video podcasts that we'll be doing on various topics. And thank you for joining us.